Laugh. We need to laugh more. We really need to laugh and laugh and laugh. Big belly laughs. Let's have sore abs from laughing.
Love it.
Much better than to have sore abs from sit-ups, right?
More functional.
Hello, hello, and welcome to another Pilates Hour. And today is a very special celebration. We are now over 200 webinars that we've done since the beginning of COVID. And today I have two amazing guests with me that have been on before. Of course, you know the famous Christy Idavoy that has led a number of these webinars when I am not able to be here. And I know I've gotten feedback that says, oh, please bring Christy back more. We like Christy more than Brent. So it's good to have Christy with us today. I've also had Stefan with me before, and Stefan is a professor up in north of us and a physical therapist. He's at the Nazareth College in the physical therapy department. And Stefan and I go way back in both the area of wellness and health and promoting wellness and health in our profession. We just realized it's what we both teach at our universities. We teach the wellness and health promotion. All right. Well, listen, we are talking about joy and movement and joy in our life. And there's a lot to discuss. And at any time, Stefan or Christy, feel free to, just express or ask questions. The Q&A for anybody that's joining us down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you click on the Q&A, that opens up where we like to get your questions. That way we can manage them a little bit better. So we're ready to get going. Looks like we have some people already on. First question that I want to put out there, and that is really differentiating between joy and pleasure or happiness. And just in your own words, what are some things that come to your mind if you needed to differentiate between joy and pleasure or joy and happiness? I think sometimes happiness can be a little closer to joy, but pleasure. What are your thoughts?
The thing that stands out, like the first thing that really stands out, the difference is like the continuity. Joy for me has a feeling of a state of being that is not going to have peaks or lows. It has a lot to do with contentment, with just feeling like satisfied with what is, whereas happiness or pleasure, it depends on some outside circumstances. It depends on something other than a state of being. Something can make me happy, something can take away my happiness, whereas joy is just more of a consistent, no big drops, no big highs and lows.
I agree about the no highs and lows. I also have a sense that happiness is more in my head, joy is in my body. Joy is throughout my whole body. But happiness is more thinking if I do this or if I do that, and it's very short-lived, like you said, Christy. And also joy compared to pleasure and happiness to some extent too. It's not having a sense of guilt or shame or anything like that.
It was, I'm trying to think of his name, it'll come to me, but he was talking about the difference between the neurosynapses of joy and happiness or joy and pleasure, and looking at the neurotransmitters, particularly dopamine and serotonin, and looking at how dopamine is very much a motivational neurotransmitter, meaning that it releases when we're getting motivated by something, which is more related to pleasure or to temporary happiness, and that the serotonin is more related to contentment. And I find that to be very interesting of what does it mean to be content? And sometimes we think of that as being bad, like, why are you content with this lifestyle that you live? Like you could hear somebody ripping on somebody that finds contentment in very simple life versus always seeking the next win and seeking that next gain. And we hit that $1 million mark and we hit this and we hit that. Those types of happiness are all dopamine based. They're all things that are hits. We do that. And when we find that people who do not have contentment, the likelihood of dopamine driving some form of addiction is significantly higher. And so this is where, we see people having the same exposure to a glass of wine, to a drug, to a medical prescribed drug, and the same individuals, possibly even the same family, but one of them has very strong addictive behaviors where the other one doesn't. And there's Lustig is his name, Dr. Lustig, that talks about how the individuals that do not have that sense of satisfaction and sense of contentment are very susceptible to the rushes that come from the dopamine in the addiction kind of phases. So very, very interesting kind of concept. And I'm glad you both brought that up. Is like there's something bigger about joy that is the whole body. And we're going to talk even more about it being bigger than our bodies, bigger than just our physiology of how we find joy. I'd like to know a little bit, because right now we're all movement practitioners, physical therapists, movement practitioners, yoga teachers, staff and teachers yoga as well. As movement practitioners, what does joy and how does joy relate to movement, or how does movement somehow bring joy into somebody's life? What is it about movement that is not the, oh man, I finally did that pose, or I finally did that's more of a dopamine hit? Where do we get the joy out of movement? I'm gonna start with Staffan this time.
Personally, or
Start personally, yeah. Share your own experience.
my own experience is, I'm a yoga teacher, Feldenkrais practitioner, and almost any time that I decide I'm going to do sun salutations or I'm going to do a 45-minute, I get bored out of moment. But if I just start moving and doing things that feels great for me, and I don't worry about the outside, I look at the neighborhood, and we have a 4-year-old living across the street. And when he's got his soccer ball out there or something else, there's nothing else exists. I mean, there's nothing else. He's not even aware that I'm out in the yard or anything. And I think for me, the joyful movement is when I'm just really present, when I don't follow some other layout or some other one telling me. That's great for learning, but it's not joyful. So when I just go based on this is what I feel like today, and then I just evolve from there and develop from there. That to me is joy.
Yeah. Christy?
Yeah, I completely agree with that experience. With I relate to that. The feeling of just dropping out of the mind and becoming the thing that you were doing, that you were so immersed that your mind, it can't escape. It's right. You're just completely immersed in whatever it is that you're doing, rather than being in the past or being in the future, or right. The nature of the mind is to like recall information, but when we're in a movement experience, whether it's dance or just on a mat, just feeling a child with a toy or a ball, climbing a tree, it drops us into presence, which you said, and that is a gift, right? Pun intended. Being in the now, and that's what movement allows us to access. And I always tell the students, I'm like, I know for a fact that you've had this experience, because if you hadn't had that experience, you wouldn't jump into a teacher training like this one. It is those moments where we really come home to ourselves, and we can have the experience of feeling whole, feeling complete in that moment. And it's, we can articulate all of this and talk about it now in hindsight, but the moment of it, the experience of it is just that pure experience.
Yeah. Let's go a little bit deeper in that idea of being present, because I think that it's almost wherever we can find, wherever be present is where we can have that contentment and joy. I know for me, teaching or treating clients or intimate relationships and comments and discussions with friends, things like that immediately put me into the present. And I find, the connection with an existing joy. I feel like I already have joy, but I feel like it becomes very present in me when I'm in that state. And I think sometimes it's a matter of just recognizing what we already have inside of us. And Stefan, you'd mentioned, that it's not, we talked a little before, it's not just in the head. Like happiness could be a mindful kind of thought of, wow, that chocolate decadence cake make me happy, right? Versus I feel contentment, in being who I am. I know who I am. I'm content waking up in the morning and saying, I'm worthy of this day. Thank you, universe, for this day. I'm content to be here today. I know where I am. I know who I am. And it's interesting how the world today is so focused on creating external locus of control. And people that have been on this webinar have heard me rant about this before, but we live in a world where everybody wants us to be subject to external feedback and external locus of control, how everything else is controlling us. And our patients come to us, and so many times it's external things that are controlling their ability to be human. And if we do our job right, if we change our intent to what the two of you are talking about, we're helping them to find a state of presence. And what came to my mind as you were talking, Christy, two things. One is I sort of imagine you doing a gyrokinesis exercise underneath a waterfall in Costa Rica. And that was like, just brought me instant connection to joy. I just wanted to cry when I saw that. Beautiful.
Come to the retreat.
I know, but it's for women.
No, it's not. It's not for women.
Well, I'm certainly used to being the only guy in a room, so I would be very comfortable with that. But I thought it was like finding your womanhood kind of thing.
No.
I have a feminine side, so I'm glad to search for that. The other thing that comes to mind is, how do we connect and help people find that present time, right? So not being in the future or the past. And Ron Fletcher was a very famous first generation Pilates teacher, trained with Clara Pilates, and was sort of push buttons a lot on things. But he made a comment one time. He says, "How can you think about anything before or after class when you're focusing on short spine?" Right? It's like. And I remember thinking about that and going like, yeah, when you're in that really complicated, trying to find that movement or explore that movement, like you cannot be thinking about anything yesterday or what you're going to cook for dinner that night, or you got in a fight with your partner and you got to deal with that. It's like, no, you're in the short spine. You're in that moment. Or when you're out doing movement and things and interacting with nature, it's very hard to do that. So the next question that I have is, how do we create environments as movement practitioners that can facilitate a state of being present? And I guess the assumption here is that being present is where we find joy. That's an assumption, that knowing who you are, internal locus of control, maybe we can discuss that a little bit. But the way that we help them find that often in movement is being present, I think, when we're being conscious, being aware, increasing awareness of their body and space. Also increases their awareness of how they interact with others, how they interact with themselves. What are your thoughts along those lines? Like, how do we, we can't make anybody have joy, right? We can't force anybody to find peace. These are things that are individual, but we find that through our work, a lot of people do discover it. So is it just random that they discover it when they go through a yoga and meditation practice? Or is there something that even with our intention as practitioners that we could actually facilitate that possible discovery of joy or enhancement of joy that already exists in them? So I'd love to open that one up. I know it's a big can of worms, but I think that we're all on the same page of sort of what our experiences would tell us. Whoever wants to go first.
I'll jump on that one. I mean, first of all, the whole contentment. In Buddhism, contentment is one of the highest levels, right? I mean, but our Western world has really messed that up a lot. I think that, and I take this to some extent from a Feldenkrais practitioner viewpoint. First of all, if you just happen to fall into content, good for you, good luck. But I think that we use strategies to help our clients do it. From a Feldenkrais perspective, if someone comes and see me, I might set up a movement puzzle. Here's something that, how do you solve to figure out how to do this? Then I bump up against myself too. Do I try to do the same thing over and over and over? Do I just give up? Or do I try to find new ways of doing it? That also tells me how you are in the rest of the world. But if I find something, if I set up a strategy to where they can solve something, the joy of solving something that you fail at initially, not do very well, there's a joy, and then all of a sudden there's this joyful exploration. Oh, I wonder what happens here and there, and but they really have to pay attention to, how is this working? How's this working within me? So that is how I try to do it with my clients, to find the joy of exploring movement.
And just before Christy goes, what is it about the exploring? You know, you talked about a kid playing with a soccer ball in the park, complete deconstructed play, a ball, they're out there just having fun. Maybe they have some role models that they've watched the games and they're trying to figure out a way to dribble the ball better. But what is it about, you know, the exploration versus even the successful accomplishment of it? Like, I've been taking Feldenkrais lessons for the last 3 months pretty rigorously in learning to walk again, and starting to find, you know, something when I'm able to acquire that new pathway or that new direction. And actually for me, a word that comes to mind is hope. Hope of recovery. And I know that's a different topic, but I think hope and joy are very closely related. But when you talk about that discovery or that exploration, solving the puzzle, what's your gut about why that brings you joy?
Because when I'm 4 years old and I'm out there, more than likely I play against Messi, or maybe it's just a tree I'm playing against. But there's an exploration. What if I do this? What if I do that? But all of a sudden, once we start school, exploration is not that important. So if they come and see you as a movement teacher, and all of a sudden it's okay to explore again, the world opens up in a different place. And I'm back to then being 4 or 5 years old, being out there with the soccer ball or the hockey puck or whatever it was. The exploration to me is almost I have to be able to explore to find play and to find joy.
Yeah. Well, we'll come back to play and that exploration again, because I think that idea of creativity also that you mentioned ties a lot into human joy, and get rid of the idea that somebody's creative or not creative. We all are creative. We all were born with imagination. And yes, systems suck that imagination out of us quite often. But if we shift it back to that internal locus of control, let's find it again. Let's own that again. Christy, what are your thoughts on some of this?
Yeah, well, definitely, I don't believe that anything is random. And I think that all of the new physics and biology shows us that there is nothing random. There is no such thing as a random mutation, as we were taught. I firmly believe all of that, and we're seeing it more and more in the epigenetics. And when we were doing mind setting, got to take a deep dive in that. And so realizing that everything is cause and effect, nothing is random. So a movement practitioner's intention absolutely weighs into the experience that the person is going to provide. It's impossible to pull those two things away from each other. And it goes back to what you said about communication, even like having a great conversation with a really dear friend. And at the end of the day, it's really all movement, whether it's movement of ideas or it's movement of the physical body, of emotions, it's movement of energy. And the most joyous way that energy moves is through the path of least resistance. So when we eliminate all of these ideas of right and wrong and color in the lines and you didn't get it right, but instead we just allow ourselves to observe and first of all, even notice, what do I feel? What do I sense? Without any expectation, other than completely being in integrity and in honesty and feeling safe, in order to really, be honest with yourself, maybe with someone else, to be able to communicate what I feel, what I'm sensing, what I'm noticing, how it's changing, what feels better. And that can happen very simply with a very basic movement experience on a mat. Just what do you feel? What parts of your body are making contact? What parts of your body are not making contact? And Feldenkrais really changed my life many, many years ago. Well, first of all, because of the pain and the challenges I had in my physical body at a very young age, from being very intense and very ego driven and being a dancer that wanted to be front and center and lead in every choreography. um, right. And it wasn't obviously, yes, movement patterns and all of this is incredibly profound and important. And yet the piece that is really life changing for me going down, that somatic is the mindset. This mindset of first we need to become aware of what is. And I feel like that piece is crucial and is often not spoken about enough or just altogether missing, where we're so moving towards what's the desired outcome. But we can't get anywhere without first becoming very comfortable and honest with what is now, and allowing it to be as it is so that we can start to transcend, to move through it. Whether that means that you're lying in a wonky position, as Shelley would say, very technical term, the wonky alignment. In order for us to move towards something different, first we need to drop in and notice, oh yeah, that is different than this. Is it better or worse? Well, it depends. How does it feel today, right now? And just allow it to be what it is. So I know that that's a huge, if I preach this a lot, one of my soapboxes of allowing things to be what they are, notice them, and then maybe we can offer some suggestions, because we don't know if moving their alignment or whatever it is actually going to make a difference in a positive, right? Is it going to create a positive experience or not? We have to observe. So really letting go of so much of this. And again, it's like any art form, anything that we learn. We need to learn the rules and the structure and the alphabet before we can start understanding words and sentences and then go off into abstract poetry, right? Or metaphysics or other things. So we need the rules, we need the structure. We need to understand, though, that it's a framework. It's not reality.
I love what
The
you
joy, right? Go ahead.
love what you said, Christy. One of my friends in the Feldenkrais community, he always said, if you're in Paris and you come up from the subway, there's a map, and there's a little dot that says you are here. It says every now and then a little punk has removed that, and you have no idea where you are on the map. It's the same thing here. You need to figure out or find out where you are before you can start developing options. And to know that where I am, that has developed through years, and this was the best solution I've found. As long as we always think everyone is doing the best they can with the information they have, and that's where we start.
Stefan, you and I were talking at the last conference a little bit about this, and that's why this sort of concept came to my mind for us to talk about today. But the idea of the journey versus always looking at goals and objectives in our physical therapy practice, like how, it's this process of being present and being connected. And I've often told this story where I had, probably about 10 women, very prominent families in Miami that had contracted me to teach them a Pilates class a couple times a week early on when I was working on my PhD in Miami. And I felt a little cheesy, to be honest with you. It was like, what am I really doing here? I'm working on my PhD, I'm a physical therapist, and I'm teaching Pilates class to a bunch of rich women in Miami. It felt a little prostituted, for lack of a better word. But what I started realizing was, as I built relationships with them, as we often do, and my focus was helping them to progress through a Pilates repertoire, to have a really positive movement experience every time they came in. And over the next couple of years, we started seeing major changes. Like we saw two of the women decided they were going to get rid of their breast implants. And one of them decided she was going to fire her nanny and she would raise her kids instead of somebody else raising her kids. Two of them got divorced because they realized they got married for the wrong reason. And two of them became yoga teachers. And it was like, I certainly wasn't saying, are you married to the right person? Shouldn't you be taking care of your own kids? I mean, that was not anything in my intention at all. I was making money, prostituting my teaching services to be able to afford graduate school, right? So, but I realized very early how powerful that was. And I remember reading something, and Shelley and I have looked high and low for it, so we're thinking maybe it's just something that came to my mind or something. But when we increase awareness of ourselves in our bodies, we increase the awareness of how our actions impact others. And this is where I want to go next, is the idea of, okay, we realize that we have a responsibility to be present. Like it's the way that we can really know who we are. And people who know who they are joyful. I mean, you see it over and over again, no matter what situation life deals them, lost loved ones, disease diagnoses, loss of businesses, they're in a joyful state, even in the worst scenarios. So one thing is that how do we find that joyful state? How do we become present? How do we know like that eternal energetic perspective of well-being? But the next question is, all right, we're practitioners. And as I was talking about my naive experience as a young Pilates teacher while I was doing my PhD, how do we as practitioners create the intention in our work to be able to not falsely impress or influence them, but truly to have an intention that they can find joy in their bodies, in their mind, in their spirit, that they can find that a little bit from the things that we're doing for them or teaching them. And maybe even sharing some of your personal experiences with somebody that you had that experience, or in your own body that you had that experience. But where does our intention as healthcare practitioners influence a joyful connection for our clients and our patients in their journey of life?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the question is really getting at what does it mean to know yourself? What does it mean to know oneself, know thyself? Um, and I feel like it's an incredibly profound philosophical question.
That's all I
Um,
wanted today, was profound philosophical. See, that's the,
yeah, this is the I mean, it takes me into, so my background is in philosophy and political science, but I enjoyed the philosophy a lot more. Um, the I am that I am, and the which is the Hebrew name for God in the Old Testament, and it is the experience of experiencing oneself. And yeah, it's so the first thing, and it's something that we at Polestar say a lot, is walk the talk. As Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. So the first thing is our own personal integrity, understanding and knowing that this too is in movement, that we too are in constant flux and becoming, and like the metaphor of the butterfly and the cocoon, I think of like metamorphosis, Kafka, right? These different stories of the human experience of constantly becoming, because our once we get on the path or the journey of increasing our awareness, and as you said, once we start increasing our awareness about our body, about anything, our awareness begins to increase all around. It is that ripple effect that someone talked about too, with like, the sense of like joy is contagious, energy is contagious, and so the locus of control, Brent, like that you were mentioning, where my identity and my understanding of myself, yes, was created, continues to be informed by external environmental conditions, culture, language, religion, finances, education, all kinds of things. And when we peel all of those labels away, and I think that that's the experience that I have personally on my mat, and why my mat has become, and I say mat very loosely, it might be a gyrotonic tower, it might be a rock on the river. It's basically going inward into my experience of embodiment, having the mindset of an observer that obviously has a lot of layers of information. And every year that goes by, every month, every practice that I learn, you get more and more colors, if you will. Your spectrum, it's like an orb that's just constantly expanding if we choose for it to be expansive. Um, and so the experience of going inward to sense myself without the goal, without the awareness of what someone else thinking of me. Am I doing it right? Did I get the pose? Do I look like the picture in the book? It's really a process of sitting in the seat of the observer, which is language that I've heard in so many different environments at this point. Very Eastern, absolutely, but really becoming the observer, which the experience of that, and again, it's kind of like those moments of, oh, I was just doing it until I became aware of doing it, and now I've lost it, or like, don't think about anything, right? And so
How would you change your language, Christy, when, talking about, we talk about this all the time in faculty training, but I think it's important for everybody to hear is how would you change your language or communication from always being external feedback of what we want them to look like to internal feedback of what we want them to feel? Because I think this is an important thing. I want people to take away some practical things from today of, I'm a healthcare practitioner. I want to have more internal locus of control. I want to be more present. And two, I want to use my language and my abilities and the access that I have as a healthcare and movement practitioner to influence others to have that same internal locus of control or internal feedback in their lives. How do we change our language from external feedback? Your body needs to look like this, your pelvis needs to be in this position, you need to have this alignment, you need to look like this picture of Devon doing this beautiful
right.
movement, versus, do you feel that beautiful? Do you feel beautiful like Devon looks? Versus, do you look like Devon looks? I want both, but you know what I'm saying.
Right. Devon is a classical ballet dancer, just in case you're wondering. Um, I like to use, I've changed my language, and it is something that we talk about and we think about a lot. Using the word notice a whole lot, using the word allow, um, you know, notice what is, and we have to allow it to be what it is so that we can notice what it is. Appreciate such and such thing. What if you do this, right? That's like, I feel like a real Shelley thing. What if you just did a little bit of that? How does that feel? Um, I think a very practical tool as a movement practitioner is using contrast cueing. So and it's also extremely Feldenkrais, or I think of Thomas Hanna, where we dissociate, where we notice, where we might do one thing different from the other, and we just allow all of it to be experiences. But in order to get there, we first need to we need to do this with ourselves first. So I think that as far as setting the intention and, the practitioner's participation in all of it is as the practitioner, I need to be really conscious of how I'm talking to myself, of how I'm relating to myself. How do I treat myself? Because if it doesn't start there and the change doesn't happen inwardly, then it's going to be really exhausting to try and do it outwardly because it's a performance. It's not you're not sharing an experience.
I want to share something that Alicia Becker just wrote in the chat, and I hope everybody's looking at it. Alicia is our licensee and a senior educator for Polestar, and really one of our most beautiful movers and expressors of human movement. She says, I believe the bug transformation comes when we love our bodies and its limitations, love the body we have, understand our bodies is our connection to this life, to earth. It is our means, our tool to relate and connect with all our relationships. It is our vehicle to live this life, transform our lives. If we love it the way it is, if we see the beauty it has, we are able to love others and our life. So thank you, Alicia, for sharing that. I think that, again, I want to get into this deeper level of, who am I, and loving ourselves and being worthy when we wake up in the morning. And, that's missing today in a huge way, that we just don't have enough of that. Staffan, love to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, I can add to that. I don't have a philosophy degree, so you got me beat there, Christy. I played
You're
hockey.
just philosophical.
Played hockey. What can I say? I agree with you, but I think one of the things that sets Pilates, Feldenkrais, yoga, Tai Chi, what have you, apart is that we eat from our practice, and I think that our authenticity and what we feel in ourselves is where we allow things to come. And I'm like you, Christy. I use allow and notice a tremendous amount. Because once I say you should feel this, the person who didn't feel that feels like, oh, I failed this one, right? Just notice and allow and notice differences. Now, I use grounding a lot. So if you do this, how do you feel if you do this a little bit different? Do you feel more grounded? Do you feel more stable in yourself? Does that feel different? Oh, maybe this didn't feel more grounded, it felt less grounded. Well, how can we change it then? How can you then, if you did this, what do you think you would have to do to feel that way instead? Because then they can sense that, and you can do the same with the breath. So how do you feel when you breathe this way compared to that way? And it's not a right or wrong, just feel the differences here. And once they feel those differences, they say, it's like, oh, funny. Isn't that interesting? And then they have an internal locus of control, because now I can affect how I sense and feel myself. And that also changes how I reflect on what's going on outside of myself. Right? And I think that is absolutely crucial. One of the things that I struggle with is whether it's yoga or Pilates or whatever, when the organizations are trying to, and there's nothing wrong with it, it's just my own bias here, when they try to affect social change to a lot of extent. My feeling is, if yoga and Pilates and all those movement practices work, it will happen without it being forced on from the outside. And you also, Christy, you talked about all these labels we put on ourselves. Once we start dropping those labels, we become deeper and deeper into ourselves, and we become more of who we are and who we want to be.
Yeah.
I think the labels, be aware of the labels.
Or the expectations that we think others have of us. I did an exercise years ago. Dr. Carol Davis had given me a book, and I've shared this story before, but the first part of the meditation is that there was a book by the Brahma Kumaris. Andrea Church was the author, and I always forget the name of the book. But Andrea starts off where you have to write down all of the perceived expectations you have in your life. So going back to childhood and thinking of our parents and siblings and grandparents, and all the way up through whether you're a professor or a student, or you're a teacher, a therapist, or family, all those things that we have. And I got my list up to about 400, and it was like a little overwhelming, right? And then the next chapter said, now imagine that each of these perceived expectations is like a layer of clothing or a costume. And immediately you felt immobile, like you couldn't even move or breathe. And she said, take each layer off, do a little Marie Kondo kind of thing where you fold it up nicely and politely and give it back theoretically to who you perceive gave you that expectation. And what was interesting to me is I got down to those last couple layers, really the most important ones. I got nervous because I was worried that I was going to see my darkness, my yang, right? I was going to see the other side of the balance of who I am. And I was very nervous about it, really, and went ahead and sort of removed those layers. And as soon as I did that, I just felt this incredible embrace from the universe, from God, from the world, from Earth. I was at Park City outside up in the mountains on a big stone while I was doing this. And it just was like so refreshing to know that I'm okay for who I am. There was no judgment in that moment. And, that's a very spiritual component to this, but we are spiritual beings and energetic beings. And what I found was it allowed me to identify things that were important and not important in my life when I could be truest to me and not truest to the perceived, and I want to emphasize, perceived expectations that the world was giving me, right? They were my perception of, not really expectations. Yes, Daphne.
We can also laugh about the whole thing, because, and I believe laughter is really what connects us to a large extent, right?
Absolutely.
My partner was sitting here in my office. We were chit-chatting one afternoon, and then all of a sudden, a student shows up. And she said, as soon as the student showed up, you became a professor. Thank God you're not a professor when you're coming home, because that wouldn't work. We can laugh, and we have the flexibility. So when we're in one position, we're a little different, but we're aware of it. This is a different role. I'm still who I am, but a little bit changes in me.
We do an exercise, Christy, you're familiar with this one and probably talk better than I, but just the who am I, and trying to get to a deeper level where we remove all the roles that we identify with and identify the core values and characters that make Staffen who Staffen is, make Christy who Christy is, make Brent who Brent is, and that we have stewardship over those roles, but those roles don't define us. And I think I'm glad you brought this up, because this is where, so much happiness is lost and identity is lost. People who identify by their role and they lose their role are not happy. People who identify as self and joy in themselves lose their role and they roll on. They just keep going, right? So you think of it, this happens a lot in the military. It happens a lot with police officers, firefighters, people who identify as being a mother and they lose a child. And all of a sudden they're not a mother anymore to a living child, and all the horrible things that makes in their life. But the thing is even though you might not have that role anymore, the question is, who are you? Who am I? Right? In that sense, and in those most horrific sense. And that's where I wanted to go next. I'll let Christy go first on this one. But looking at people who have had horrible things happen in their life, and could be in horrible states, whether they're inflicted externally or disease or universally, that they could easily say, why me? Like, why is this happening to me? How did this happen to me, right? And we know that sometimes they're self-induced, and sometimes they're other people's free agency that induce harm on others, and sometimes it's just life. But I've seen people in all three states that have been able to find joy even in that state. And I think it comes down to where we're getting here is that they know who they are. And Christy, I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that as it pertains to people that are in pain or that are suffering, that have been able to still identify with their core self, their core being, with their connection to humanity, that they've been able to find joy.
Ooh. So, I think it has a lot to do with being in service. And you used the word stewardship earlier, and you know, uh, I think it's also, again, you just mentioned a lot of different scenarios, and all of those scenarios depend on perspective and how you perceive life, how you perceive the world and the way things happen. Um, when we take our power back, when we realize that we are living in an attraction based universe, that there are electromagnetic laws that control the flow of water, why the river flows towards the ocean. There is an electromagnetic force that we are a part of. And when we move into life and we look at life through the lens of being in service to this earth, in service to my body, in service to each other, in service to the land that, I think what happens is with our modern lives, when we live in urban areas, we become so far removed from the cycle of life. And we don't even realize that. I mean, I remember the first time I was in a quote unquote developing, or back then it was called a third world country, and having really deep moments of realizing so many things that are so obvious and common sense that dirt, we need dirt is not dirty. For example, that was a huge one. Dirt's not dirty. In fact, without it, there's no food. Without it, there's nothing. So I love Elise's comment, and our connection to the earth, our connection to our bodies, our connection to ourselves. The more that we are cultivating, and I very intentionally use the word cultivate as a culture, as in our togetherness, we are choosing a moral compass, a value system that puts service in the center, in the axis of what is truly important. The more resilient we become, the more we know ourselves, the more we will see what might look like, oh my gosh, this country, these people have quote unquote nothing, and they're so joyous and they're so happy. It's only someone else's perception rather, that would qualify them as not having anything, right? They're not perceiving themselves that way. And when we study original cultures, Native American cultures, I've had the honor, the privilege, the huge blessing of being invited to go and do sleepovers and hang out for a week in Native American territories where, I live in Costa Rica. They don't speak Spanish. Um, they're not Costa Rican. They see the Costa Ricans as the foreigner. It's the same. You could be German, you could be Asian, you could be Costa Rican. It's all the same as far as they're concerned. Um, and if I judge them as a New Yorker, I'd say, my God, they're so poor. They've got nothing. How are they so happy? Right? Um,
That was
and
that
I
India Irie song, that song by India Irie, where she goes down and she talks about how all she could do was complain about being from the USA. And she met a guy in Brazil that was blind in the favelas, and he said, "Honey, here it's paradise." And it put all of her perspective back. So we can write that song in the after notes. But India Irie, I think Alicia Becker and her team turned me on to her actually. So, sorry.
But yeah, I mean, when you choose to be a practitioner, or life choose, somehow you end up in this seat and you're guiding another human through an experience that's gonna connect them with their bodies, with their minds. You are in a place of service. And I think that the more we can cultivate that in ourselves and each other, and really adopt it as a lifestyle, the more we're going to understand what it is to live in joy.
Yeah, I love that. Staffen, we got a few more minutes. Let's finish up, bring it home with the idea of community, with the idea of societal humanity components that we talked about before before we came on live. But just along the lines of what Christy's talking about, what we're seeing in the chat about service, about the idea of creating just opportunity of being present with other people and helping them be present, helping them have an experience.
I think that, and it's something I've focused on lately or thought a lot about, is the sense of community and neighborhood. You know, we live in a neighborhood where I see the kids out all the time, and they don't want any fences because the kids are running through all the yards, all the backyards, right? It's a real community, and that also, and I agree with service. It's really crucial. I think purpose to me is similar to service. There's also something about when you're in a community, someone relies on me, right? There's someone who relies on me to some extent. And I think that sense of is so important for us to get that sense that, because then all of a sudden there's meaning, there's purpose, and all those things, and that to me is crucial. We had one lady who walked our dog every day. She was 81 years old. She was our neighbor. She came by at 4 o'clock, and that was her purpose. That was her thing. She came back, picked up our dog, and walked her, and then chatted with us for a while. But that was her way of being part of the community. And I think this sense of community, and when we talk about joy and movements, to me, it has to start in that community. It has to start with the parents. It has to start with allowing the kids to be outside and run through the yards and play and do what they need to do. And I have to show that I really enjoy it, right? Yeah, I'll go out and kick with you guys. You know, I'll go out and play some street hockey with you guys. And I have to show that this is not a burden for me. Oh God, I got to be with those kids again. No, this is fun. This is joyful. I'll laugh with you guys. And I mean, I'm silly because you guys are much better than me because I'm too old to do this stuff, right? But I laugh with them. We have fun and we build community, and the parents see us do. And that to me and I think a lot of what we see in society today, especially in the United States, is that lack of community.
Yeah. I
That's
could,
the aloneness, relying on each other for the
yeah.
joy, for the safety, for
The
everything.
tribal, going back to the tribal and community kind of component. You know, it was interesting. I've done a lot of research on just dosing of movement for all ages. And that one of the most important things is this, what we call deconstructed play, what Staffan's referring to, of just pick up games, capture the flag, pick up game of basketball out, playing in the mud kitchens, you know, there's all kinds of things that kids are so creative in. And the idea that the more dosing of that creative play, especially outdoors, has a direct correlation with cognitive development in young children, a direct correlation with emotional development in teenagers all the way up to 25, and a direct correlation with metabolic disorders all the way through the whole age bracket. And the opposite is true, is that too much structure, too much sedentarism, the dosing of that has a direct correlation with the opposite of all. It makes learning cognition poorer for young children. American Heart Association just came out and made a very strong statement for parents to as much as possible, have little to no screen time for their kids in developmental years, because they're seeing the aftermath of it in older kids. We've seen things where the level of depression, there's some great studies that came out of Korea of teenagers that are not actively outdoors playing and socializing, sort of the aftermath of COVID and being shut in and losing that socialization. But you look at, you know, unfortunately, the last shooters that we've had, the last 5 shooters, all have come from that sedentary gaming, depression, antidepressants, come off the antidepressants when they're 18, 19 years old, and now they're susceptible, which you hear on the TV, suicidal and homicidal tendencies. And then you put a weapon in their hands, and now you have the perfect storm for a disaster in a community. And I guess the point that I want to drive home is that we collectively, everybody that's listening to this webinar in our profession, we actually have a much greater impact because of our awareness of how movement impacts joy. We have that, we do know that. We know that because that's what touched us, that's what led us to go into the field that we're in. And hopefully we continue to have those joyful moments as we move and as we help others move and as we connect through movement and play. And now the challenge is this: with 80% of the society sitting more than 13 hours a day, how do we as movement practitioners, how do we bring the joy related to movement, exploration, outdoors, nature, how do we bring that into our communities? And it's going to be more than just the hour that we spend with our client in a Pilates class or a physical therapy session. And I want to leave us with the idea that we have that stewardship of movement and joy in our lives as our licenses, our certifications. We are those. Joseph Pilates made a very bold statement years ago, is that those that practice contrology, that wasn't going to Pilates class every day, but those that practice contrology, internal locus of control, if everybody did that, there would be no need for hospitals, prisons, or insane asylums. It's a very bold statement. But think about how we feel after having a beautiful Pilates or yoga class or Feldenkrais session. We certainly don't feel like getting up and doing harm to others or harm to ourselves or being even dishonest or saying harmful things to ourselves that deprecate ourselves. So I want to just send out this idea. I think is perfect for our 200th celebration, and so great to have Staffan and Christy with their insight and their inspiration, and they really do live this. That's why I picked them. They live the idea of movement, bringing joy and searching for joy, first in themselves, and then bringing it to others through movement and through play and through exploration. Any last thing you want to say? We're out of time, but you guys have just been such delightful guests, and your insight has been beautiful. Maybe a sentence or something you'd want to share with the audience?
I would echo what Stefan said about laughter. Laugh. We need to laugh more. We really need to laugh and laugh and laugh. Big belly laughs. Let's have sore abs from laughing.
Love it.
Much better than to have sore abs from sit-ups, right?
More functional.
So my favorite poem is by Hafiz, and it says, "God and I are like two fat people in a small boat. We keep bumping into each other and laughing." I love it. Stefan, any last thing you want to share?
Oh, I agree with Christy. It's about laughter and it's about connecting and just enjoying each other, and that life is good, right? Life is good. Let's laugh. Let's be outside, and let's not get neurotic about things. The Bhagavad Gita says that yoga is skillful movement. Everything we do is yoga, and every movement we do can be joyful, right?
Yeah.
Have to be like, oh, I'm going to do a joyful movement now. No,
Just move. Well, thank you both very much. Appreciate your time.